we were in the standing car for on a 5-hour train, and there was 8 of us there. We had 2 high schoolers who were Uyghur and Kazakh. We had one woman from Guangxi, and then we had another 3 people who were from other regions. And so it put my Chinese to the test. We were talking in Chinese for 5 hours straight on every topic, like from American politics to Chinese politics. We talked about Trump. We talked about kind of American racial dynamics and Chinese ethnic dynamics, and kind of about minorities and how they are in Xinjiang. Talked about Xinjiang travel, kind of where you are. And so a lot of that like really stayed with me. Yeah, so my name is Zacharias. I am a junior now at Georgetown University studying international politics. So I'm originally from Florida, but now go to college in the US in D.C. Yeah, I mean, I think the first time I like really learned about China and like Chinese culture as a whole was through my mom. So my mom started her own business and has worked a lot with China and has does sourcing from China. And so she came to like our Great American Teach-In in like middle school. And during that point, like she brought fortune cookies and told us about her work. And so that's when I really got to first hear about China and get a better sense of what it meant in the world. And that just only increased as I kept starting to read the news and keeping up with global events. China just kept coming up again and again. And you would just hear about China since it is such a big country and a big presence in the world. My hometown does not have a large Chinese community. We do not have a Chinese like many cultural events. We don't really celebrate like Spring Festival. And so I didn't really get a great sense of it and better sense of the whole thing until I came to Georgetown and was in DC. And that's when I really got for the first time to see kind of Chinese culture and get like a better sense of Chinese communities in the US, especially like through seeing Chinatown.
You know, when people mention Georgetown and DC, they usually thinking about politics, right? So what is the general vibe like on your campus in DC?
I think the view in general, I mean, especially a political campus and one that is in the heart of the capital, it's very hawkish. A lot of people have a lot of views on what China is. And I mean, everyone sees it as a great competition, great power competition between the US and China. And like US and China relations are going to be the defining feature. And so in that way, I think a lot of people don't have the most positive view of China. The US has told a lot of us to not go to China. Many of our professors will tell us do not go to China. And so not a lot of people have been here. Not a lot of people understand it, but I think a lot of people view it like purely through a political lens of great power competition. And so it's generally like a negative impression of the country.
So why you came to China?
Because I didn't want to be like everybody else. I think that the only way you can truly know a country is to have been there and live there and meet the people, talk to the people, be on the ground, travel around, see different places. I mean, China's not a unitary country. There's huge differences from like Shanghai to Kashgar. If you go north to south, there's like different foods, different cultures, different thought. People have different beliefs in different cities, different ways of life. And so China's not like one unit in a lot of ways. There's a lot of different viewpoints, and I think it's very easy to get caught up in what the news says. The news has their own perspective, and they'll say kind of more US-centric, especially from Western news outlets because of the Great Firewall. We don't really get as many Chinese perspectives within our internet space. And so I came to China just to kind of, well, one, to improve my Chinese. I wanted to get better, and I wanted to learn simplified, not traditional. But 2, I think to really just get a better sense of what do people on the ground feel, what's the pulse of society, get a better, through my coursework, understand Chinese economic growth and Chinese politics domestically, and just kind of through my travels get a better sense of who composes China, what is China, and how does it provinces and like its cities kind of define like what they view and how their views are kind of coming together through policy.
Thanks for sharing. So we're right now in Shanghai and also in been to Beijing before, and also most recently in Xinjiang. So what differences you notice amongst those cities?
Very big differences. I feel like Shanghai for me has been probably the most open. It feels a lot like the West here. There's a large Western influence. A lot of expats live here. so foreigners who have moved here and just stayed here. So you can definitely like see there's Mexican restaurants around, there's every type of food. There's a lot of people in Shanghai. It's a financial center, and so in that sense, it feels not as far from home. It's more of like a big city and an international city, and so it feels not as like restrictive here in a lot of ways. Whereas going to maybe Beijing, for example, I mean, I stayed near near Tiananmen Square, and so there was a lot of security. It was very heightened. I mean, we felt the significance of the cultural landmarks we were at, and you just kind of feel a little more of the presence of the government since it is the capital. So things feel a little more traditional in that sense. And then Xinjiang was completely different from everything, being a minority area. So we saw I mean, we got to go to the kind of northern parts and then the southern parts. And so through that, definitely a really big security presence everywhere you go. I had someone tell us at a US-China dialogue that cops in Xinjiang are required to be on the scene of a call within 30 seconds of that call being placed. And you definitely felt that. I mean, every street block had cops. There was military sentries in front of important buildings. And so you felt the security presence. I mean, as foreigners, we've been told a lot of things about Xinjiang and kind of like be cautious. I mean, even going there for my program, my program administrators are like, oh, watch out, you should be in a tour group, and you should do these things. And I think, honestly, at the end, we didn't really encounter as many problems as we were told we would. We were only stopped by the police maybe twice, 3 times, asking us for our passports and what we were doing here, which we expected to be way more. But I will say, I think Xinjiang was definitely the most unique experience. It really was a great experience, a really pretty place. I think there's some unfortunate things happening and then some other really nice things happening in the region. I think I understand why there's a larger security presence now. I mean, just reading up on the history and going to the museum and understanding the terrorism that has occurred in Urumqi and Kashgar. But there's also just some things that are less fortunate, like the destruction of the old town in Kashgar and the rebuilding of it in a way that feels not genuine and more for like as a Disneyland version than like a genuine Uyghur city.
Okay, so other than Xinjiang, cross-strait relations is a hot topic when we're talking about US-China relations. So you spent a summer in Taiwan and also right now in mainland China. So do you see any differences between those two sides?
No, I mean, I think there's definitely some differences. Part of it comes from being in a divided internet ecosystem where we're not all on the same platforms, we're not all using the same things, we don't have access to the same information. I think in general, what I have found when I was in Taiwan was like regarding cross-strait relations, that basically I think Taiwanese people are more cautious and they prefer, the majority of them prefer the status quo as it is. And so they don't really seek to see a change in how things are right now because they're quite happy with the situation. I mean, of course, there's extremes on both ends and you can see that when you go there. But I think understanding that is a key principle for them. They don't really have any desire to make anything like rash choice to go full independence or to become fully assimilated with China. I think it's very hard to merge two systems together that have been fundamentally apart for more than like 80 years. And so that's going to be a challenge. And I think that's something that both sides probably need to understand. And just being in China, just understanding like there's not a lot of agreement over Taiwan. I mean, between us and them, I mean, it's pretty much a one-sided issue where, yeah, this is the Chinese dream. This is the great rejuvenation of the Chinese people is achieving reunification with Taiwan. And so that's kind of what I've counted here mostly. I mean, there's a difference of whether we will go to war over Taiwan or not. And so that's been some interesting conversations to have with people in Shanghai.
You mentioned you're studying international relations politics from Georgetown. What sparked your interest in this field?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the first thing that like really sparked my interest is my parents used to have like a magazine delivered to our house weekly, and it was called The Week, and it was just to cover all the events, and I always found that international events were the most interesting ones. And so I always gravitated towards that. I really got interested in like international affairs. I've always been interested in geography. I like to know where every country was in the world. And so kind of all that together, and then I've been fortunate enough to be able to travel to a bunch of places, and so just being able to see the world has really opened my eyes to like there's a lot more out here, and I'd really like to be involved with that, and I'd love a career where I could see the world. And so all of that comes to a head, and I decided to apply to Georgetown because I think it's the best foreign policy school in the U.S., just being located in the capital in D.C. And so, yeah, I mean, after that, after my first semester, I was sold, and I knew being in this field and in this career path, wherever it takes me, is definitely something I wanted to do.
So are you planning to be a diplomat in the future?
Maybe. We'll see. The state of everything in the U.S. is very much in flux right now. So I will take whatever job I can get in the foreign policy or international relations sphere, whether that's in government, corporate, think tank, and any other space.
Okay, that sounds good. So we'll dive into the personal level because you said that you spent time in Taiwan, in Shanghai, so on and so forth. So could you please share a memorable experiences when you interact with the Eastern cultures, no matter it's positive or negative?
Yeah. I would say, honestly, one of my most memorable experiences will probably be what happened in Xinjiang on that train from Ili to Urumqi, because we were in the standing car for on a 5-hour train, and there was 8 of us there. We had 2 high schoolers who were Uyghur and Kazakh. We had one man from Guangxi, and then we had another 3 people who were from other regions. And so it put my Chinese to the test. We were talking in Chinese for 5 hours straight on every topic, like from American politics to Chinese politics. We talked about Trump. We talked about kind of American racial dynamics and Chinese ethnic dynamics and kind of about minorities and how they are in Xinjiang. Talked about Xinjiang travel, kind of where you are. And so a lot of that like really stayed with me. It was really interesting to hear what people are thinking about when they think about the U.S., the questions they have about the U.S. And a bunch of car rides, I've been asked multiple times about like American racial dynamics and minorities in the U.S., which has been really interesting to me. I didn't think that was much of interest to people in China, but there's just a general lack of understanding of how it works. Since we don't really have ethnic minorities, we have more of racial minorities. So I found that really interesting. Another conversation I think that will stick with me is with a Didi driver in Suzhou, and we were talking with her, and at one point she goes, "Oh, do you guys eat rice in the U.S.?" And I was like, "Oh, well, yeah, of course. Like we have Chinese immigrants," and I think that really like shocked her. She'd never known that like we didn't eat anything but hamburgers in the U.S. and like breaking those stereotypes I think was really informative for me just to see like and get a better sense of like maybe what is an ordinary person here in China and like what does a person think of the U.S., what's their impression of the U.S., what's their kind of expectations of the U.S. and like there's almost like their stereotypes of the U.S. because we don't get that in the U.S. We can't see that. You only get that by being here in China.
Okay, follow up on that. Just out of curiosity, if you had a chance to ask a question to everyday Chinese people, what would you want to ask?
Ooh, I need to think. I think maybe a question that could be good to ask is, what is your impression of the U.S. and why do you think of the U.S. this way? And not just like an impression of the current administration and of what their policies are, but just kind of the U.S. American culture in general, level of exposure to American culture and American people, how many interactions you've had with American people. I think that's my big thing because less and less Americans are coming to the U.S. or to China to study and to work, and so that exposure is becoming more limited as time goes on. And so I think that's going to have negative effects for both sides, where there's less understanding. And so I'm always curious what people think when they hear about the U.S. and like when they think of the U.S., what their first impressions are, because that's often a defining feature of how you're going to view and if you're going to have a negative or positive perception. And I think a lot of times these perceptions are uninformed because you have not been to the U.S., you haven't met an American, but you've read news, you've read maybe you've watched something on Bilibili, or you've like seen something on social media, and that's all you take for your impressions. And I think a lot of people do it in the U.S. and a lot of people are doing it in China. And so I think to be able to be like, I'd want to ask that question in person and then be able to help provide a response and to like clarify some things.
Okay, perfect. Since you have already mentioned the tensions in the current bilateral relationship, what areas do you think both sides could still find room to collaborate in the near future? And on the flip side, what areas might remain difficult?
Yeah, I think I think the ones that we can't are pretty clear. I think Taiwan will just I've just discovered is a non-starter. There's no point in talking about cross-strait relations because it's this is our policy and this is what we're sticking with, and the U.S. won't clarify, and so that's just kind of a dead end. But I think there's a lot we can cooperate on. I think surprisingly, I realized that we have a lot in common over North Korea and concerns over North Korea and how they are acting in the international system. So that's a really big point of cooperation since we both have shared concerns over that. I think another thing we can collaborate on, maybe not this 4 years, but maybe in the future, is climate. Climate change affects all of us, and I think genuinely that can be something that can provide a lot of cooperation, especially with green tech and kind of moving away from carbon emissions and more towards a carbon neutral economy to help there. I think something the US would see a very great potential for collaboration on is with fentanyl and Chinese transnational crime, being able to crack down on that and crack down on fentanyl precursors being sent to Mexico, which then proliferate into the US, would be a really great form of collaboration. I think there's a bunch of other areas we can collaborate on, maybe like AI and technology, just working on kind of looking at the ethical issues there. And so there's a lot of like mediums we can collaborate on. I think business, we have a lot of potential. I mean, China, the trade war has not been great for US and Chinese business relations, but I think that there's still a lot of deep investments in China, and that if we can work on maybe more stabilization in the trade relationship, there could be some work and done there to kind of make it more balanced.